Well, I am back from vacation. We've got 3 weeks worth of comics to catch up on, so let's get to it. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week, usually, after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In this installment, in each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan, and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. This is your first and only warning. Right now, we're going to start by taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on December 18th, 2024, originally published November 20th, 2024. First, just a few comments about The Question All Along the Watchtower #1. Now, this picks up Renee Montoya, I was going to say the new Question. She's been the Question for about, 10, 15 years now. I still think of her as the new one, though. Anyway, she got fired as the commissioner of Gotham City, and now she finds herself appointed as the head of security on the Watchtower of the newly assembled Justice League Unlimited, which basically welcomes pretty much every superhero in the DC universe to be a Justice League member, and they all have living quarters that they can take advantage of on the Watchtower satellite. But as you can imagine, because that is so huge, there's a lot of moving parts going on. Not only that, but in the wake of what happened with Amanda Waller and Absolute Power, the heroes want to make sure that there can't be another kind of infestation in their ranks and other, security issues that might be taken advantage of. And so that's what Renee Montoya, the Question, is in charge of, making sure that there's, no security problems that might undo what they're trying to do. I think the premise has some potential that they probably will not take advantage of. I would be really interested in a Question book where we see kind of like a little bit of the underbelly of some of these heroes, a little bit of their weaknesses. I think that as she's looking for potential betrayals, because she's going to be keeping such a close eye on everybody and their behaviors, I think this would be a great book to get to know, one issue at a time, some of the less focused on members of the DC universe. What makes them tick? Why something about them might initially seem suspicious. This would be a great book that could bring out just the flaws, the quirks, and motivations of numerous characters throughout the DC universe. It looks like it's not going to necessarily be used for that. It's kind of a bit of a murder mystery to start things off. One of the challengers of the unknown gets killed. It also looks like it's going to be focusing on Montoya as a character and what makes her tick, which I'm on board for, but I'm not excited about the idea of a major part of who she is, her identity, what makes her tick, being a relationship that she had, that she was dating, who is it? Batwoman, that's right. Batwoman shows up in this issue. And of course, I'm not going to see eye to eye with the writer probably on, their view of gay relationships. But I mean, like, that issue aside, I don't like when comics make a defining characteristic of someone's, like, their identity, a romance necessarily. There are some exceptions to that, but it's generally not what I'm into most of the time, because even those heterosexual relationships, they're not taken seriously, they don't go the distance, it's just characters playing the field, and it comes off like CW romance in the end. If it's going to be like an eternal couple, like a Superman and Lois, then I'm interested in seeing that go the distance. But the other instances of kind of relationships and dating kind of being at the forefront, I'm not really interested in. Now, again, Batwoman is an ex here, and it seems that they're mostly going to leverage that for the awkwardness of her working with this woman who was her ex, and so I could maybe find that interesting. Still, given the potential, I think, that this setup has, that they really do not seem like they're going to go in the direction of taking advantage of, the Question #2, All Along the Watchtower, is really going to have to do some things that I don't expect that will hook me in. At this point, it doesn't look like I'll be in this book for the long haul, but I'm willing to give it 1 or 2 more issues. Now, Tom King's Wonder Woman book I've been reading and enjoying for a while. She has been going up against this villain called the Sovereign, who seems to be like kind of an like an evil opposite to Uncle Sam, representing just like the evil and corrupt aspects of U.S. government, its history, its actions, and things like that. And I'm really interested in that as a concept. But the style of writing in the last handful of issues, I've been having a little bit of trouble with. As the story is playing out, we're having this constant narration going on from Sovereign, speaking presumably to Wonder Woman's future grown-up daughter. And there's the relationship between that narration and what's happening right in front of us can be pretty obscured at times. And because of that, it's almost like trying to follow two story threads at the same time. Some people, I think, will really be into that. It's kind of an artistic device. Books like Watchmen certainly have that kind of thing going on. But I would rather the book focus on Wonder Woman as a character, Diana, what makes her tick, instead of kind of this artsy thing that is keeping me at a bit of a distance from the story, and also at a distance from the narrator at the same time. That said, this is part one of a story arc called, I believe, The Fury or something, but it's in the wake of Steve Trevor's death, and Wonder Woman is understandably furious about this. And so in this issue, she and like her, the Wonder Woman family, as it were, which would be consist of Cheetah, oddly enough, the two different two different Wonder Girls and Donna Troy. And they're kind of acting as Wonder Woman's agents going out in the world while she is caring for a baby that is her and Steve Trevor's child. But they are working as a team, she and her Wonder Girls, to strip the Sovereign of his resources in what is seemingly like this coordinated attack that will take him down once and for all. And it looks like we're going to see how that plays out in this story arc. I'm very glad, though, that it looks like Steve Trevor is not going to be gone forever, because there's a backup story with him kind of in the afterlife following him. I'm like, well, if we're still following a dead character, I'm thinking that he's going to be coming back to life, especially with how his little support story ends. Let's get to that, because there's some thematic stuff of interest too. So the story is called Elysium, and we view it through like a first-person perspective. We don't actually see Steve Trevor, but we're seeing, as though we're playing him in a video game. But he is in Elysium and being introduced to all these wonderful things about quote-unquote heaven that surely will keep him happy forever, but none of them truly are. He's not really able to enjoy any of these things. He has the most wonderful food. His beloved grandmother is there. He has the opportunity to vanquish foes. There's a grand library that he can visit. Which, as a side note, the keeper of the library says, hey, we also just acquired the only true testament on how to achieve inner peace, which would suggest to me one of two things. One, that we're meant to see this guy as ignorant, arrogant, and wrong despite being here in the afterlife. Or maybe this is a peek into the writer's viewpoint, which, based on this, would be that, none of the scriptures that people adhere to in the world are true. The writer does seem to be, I think, both in this story and in the main story, a little bit more interested in theme than in the story necessarily being the priority and making the most sense. And that can be fine for me sometimes if I'm willing to kind of accept that. I would prefer to have my cake and eat it too, have a strong story that just works as a story, and great theming that doesn't compromise the internal logic of the story. I'm not sure if that's quite pulled off to my satisfaction in both of these stories here. But what's intriguing to me is this presentation of quote-unquote heaven or paradise or Elysium as it's called here. To continue on, he has the opportunity to have meaningless sex with a beautiful woman. He has a hangout at a bar with comrades from the military that passed away that now he's reunited with. And the grandmother angle, by the way, is interesting to me. I'm trying to figure out, okay, are we supposed to assume that this Elysium, this Greek gods inspired view of the afterlife is where everyone actually goes, or I think more likely if this story is meant to be logically coherent and the DC universe is meant to be logically coherent, I would think that we're supposed to interpret this as just how this person is subjectively experiencing their reunion with loved ones and stuff. That, like, if someone was Catholic, then they would go to a Catholic concept of heaven. If someone was, anyway. So, but again, this would be an example of, like, I'm not sure how this works in terms of the internal logic of the DC universe as a whole. It doesn't seem to be thinking much beyond these kind of moments that the writer wants to create here. But the moment, the idea that is being prioritized is that Steve Trevor is not happy. Someone says to him, "It is most unusual. In eternity, never has anyone come to Elysium and mourned. You have attained paradise. What more could you possibly desire?" And his simple one-word answer is her, referring to Wonder Woman. And, in one sense, I like that they are building up this as like a romance of the ages. They've, of course, done that for many years with Superman and Lois. More recent, like years after that, I would say, Wally West and Linda Park. They are like a perma couple, married, family, kids. It really looks recently like Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris are going in that direction. And if Wonder Woman if they're going to have a story about her romantically, then I would want them to commit to a long-term, like, this is it, permanent relationship between her and Steve Trevor. So, in some ways, I like that they're playing up that Steve Trevor only has eyes for her. Hopefully that is reciprocated, especially since they have a kid together at this point. But in this setting, what's interesting to me is their concept of heaven that's being presented here, which I think, Greek gods aside, reflects what a lot of people might think about heaven. That, like, maybe it would seem boring. Like, if heaven can't be wonderful if those we love are not there with us. Even the most wonderful things that we could have in this life, they would not be ultimately satisfying forever. And when we have those kinds of concepts of heaven, it's no wonder they're disappointing, because they are missing the key ingredient that actually makes heaven, quote unquote, heaven. What makes heaven absolutely wonderful and all that it will be, so that it can actually be completely satisfying forever. What's missing? God. Specifically Yahweh, who is described as being completely perfect and holy and wonderful, and that what he has for us in eternity as believers is that which will never wear out, that which will never spoil or fade, and that which is beyond what we can fathom right now. So, as a side note, any attempts at depicting eternal satisfaction with Yahweh in fiction are going to fall short. So I think it's actually wise to avoid such depictions, because that existence is beyond what any writer in this world is going to be able to convey. Now, on an emotional level, is it difficult for me to imagine being separated from my wife if I were to pass away years before her? Yeah, but if Scripture is true in saying what it says about the nature of who God is and what it means to live fully in His presence, then yeah, I don't understand exactly how that's going to work. But if that's true, then it will not fall short. It will not disappoint. I won't live in this longing loneliness that Steve Trevor is in without Wonder Woman there with him. So if we are developing or inadvertently having in our thoughts ideas of quote-unquote heaven that fall short, there's probably something about our view of God that is at play there. So anyway, I found this element very interesting, very thought-provoking. Okay, looking now at comics released to the Ultra tier on December 25th, 2024, originally published November 27th, 2024. First of those, Justice League Unlimited #1, part of the All In initiative. And this is an interesting vibe. I wasn't sure what I would think of the amount of potential clutter of DC characters, given that they are, with this new Justice League Unlimited initiative, inviting basically every known superhero in the DC universe into the Justice League. But there's some interesting kind of setup shots, establishing shots, if you will, that give this sense of not just the Justice League Unlimited animated series where you would see tons of characters in the background and it'd be kind of a fun Where's Waldo who's who of the DC universe that you're trying to figure out as you look at these richly populated panels. But it also reminded me it actually made me a little bit want to play DC Universe Infinite online. Just remembering that massive headquarters that you can just fly through and see all these other heroes flying around. So it's a different vibe to it, and I'm kind of interested. Star Sapphire gets a little bit of attention as kind of like, she's not brand new to the Star Sapphire powers, but she's still fairly new to really leaning into learning how to use them and more specifically live the life of a hero and think in terms of how do heroes operate, how do they go about rescuing, how do they make quick decisions in the moment. And they pair her up with Black Lightning in one of the first teams to go out, and there's a cool kind of reasoning there because Black Lightning, Jefferson Pierce, of course, has a background in education, and so he naturally is fit as a teacher to kind of like, even as she's out on her first mission with the Justice League officially, he's also there to kind of help her figure out how to make fast and difficult decisions. So I like the thinking in that team composition. But I would say the main character, at least that stood out to me, that gets some focus is Airwave. And of course, this character has been around for a long time, but they're treating him as though he's kind of new to the hero business. So I'm not sure if this is a different civilian taking up the Airwave mantle, or if at some point in the various continuity resets they decided actually Airwave didn't exist before now. I don't know exactly how it came to be, but this version of Airwave is a rookie. He has a very peculiar power of being able to turn into like electromagnetic waves and kind of like broadcast himself through cell phones and broadcast signals, and he can basically turn himself into a variety of types of broadcast signals, which is an unusual power, and you would think, when is that going to have application? In fact, it's that very factor that keeps Red Tornado from sending him out on a mission right away, because he's like, your powers aren't relevant to this situation. Well, they actually do become relevant when Star Sapphire realizes that she can help a dying man in his seemingly final moments to be healed if his wife can be found, because her power is linked to love. And I don't know if this is the first time we see this being done by Star Sapphire or a Star Sapphire ring, but she is able to use their connection of love to fuel some kind of healing by finding this dying man's wife. And then with the help of Airwave, who is able to locate her by kind of broadcasting himself through everybody's cell phones in the area. Do you know this woman? Do you know this one? He's calling out for this woman's name. It's his wife. He's in desperate need of her, and he's able to track her down and bring her over to Star Sapphire, who then uses this power to save his life. And so, surprisingly, Airwave's power becomes very relevant and makes it possible for this man's life to be saved. And I love that kind of device where you take... It reminds me of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, where they have these kind of lame powers that you would think, that is never going to be useful. But then you, through some really creative thinking on the parts of the characters, and of course on the part of the writer who's coming up with all this stuff, you discover that, oh, if you just are really thoughtful and creative, you can actually, find a great use for these powers. I think that's really, really cool. So, and Airwave is also an endearing character because he's a rookie. He's very insecure, trying to figure out how can he possibly be useful and fit in with all these iconic heroes. So he's a very endearing character, which makes the big surprise at the end all the more shocking and intriguing. Airwave goes back to his quarters on the Justice League Watchtower on the advice from Black Lightning to like, hey, you did great, but take a breather, let that adrenaline kind of wear off. He takes his mask off, he's puts his head in his hands, tears are coming down his eyes, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, man, this would be such an intense experience, so cool that and admirable that he really just willed himself to step into this crazy situation and be useful in that. So he's like reflecting, they're so nice to me, all of them. They accept me for who I am. Nobody's ever trusted me like that, which makes me wonder, okay, well, what's in his background that he's maybe referring to? And then he says, they have no idea what that means or how helpful that is, since I'm here to kill them all. He says with tears streaming down his face in the big stinger panel for the end of the issue. And so I'm wondering, is he actually really darkly disturbed and evil, or is he just thinking to himself, I don't want to kill them, but I inevitably, because of what has brought me here, going to kill them? I can see it being that kind of scenario, but I would really be interested in the twist of him actually having this nefarious motive mixed in with other elements that are endearing and good-hearted and stuff. I love kind of that complexity in a character, and so I'm hoping that it'll be not just like a little bit of an unfair, cheap tease, but this actually does imply some complexity that we can really sink our teeth into. So anyway, great first impressions with Justice League Unlimited #1. Next up, Superman 20. We are continuing the return of Doomsday. After the revelation last issue, we got Superman it was in Superman 19 that it was revealed that the future cosmic being known as the Time Trapper is actually this uber super evolved Doomsday of the future. That's what he eventually evolves into after his many deaths, after which each time he evolves and becomes more capable, strong, something like that. Evidently, he becomes a lot more intelligent at some point too, and ultimately becomes the Time Trapper, which was confusing to me because I thought the Time Trapper was established to be like Vandal Savage or something, a future version of him. Anyway, so my concerns last time were that this Doomsday story might end up jumping the shark. When Doomsday shows up, people need to die. I mean, and if you don't do that, he loses his power as a character. And we're not seeing, well, we do see one death. We see, I assume, just the for now death of Parasite, which had a cool moment. He was part of the LexCorp team to try and defend against Doomsday's attack as a second line of defense. And I was like, dude, that's brilliant. Totally sick Parasite on Doomsday and have him drain that sucker dry. Well, evidently he was draining him and loving it, but it wasn't happening fast enough. Doomsday rips him in half, and that's the end of that. But I can't imagine this is actually the end forever of Parasite. So in that regard, I'm like, okay, it's good that he at least did that, but I feel like for Doomsday to show up, you show him up when there's really a significant, pseudo-permanent death that's at least going to last for 10 years of publishing time. Otherwise, he loses his intensity when he shows up in a story. We've also got Lois Lane still having powers, Kryptonian-ish powers, if not identical powers, that allow her to be the superhero Superwoman. And I saw recently that there's going to be like a special, maybe a one-shot of Superwoman. I don't know if she's getting her own series. I'm not ready for Lois to go that route. I think it's an interesting storyline to put her on the front lines with her husband and getting a prolonged taste of his life. I think that's really cool for them, and they could do some great storytelling with that. Even after she presumably reverts back to just being a normal human, they will have shared this experience. She'll understand her husband in a deeper way than she has before. But I don't want this to be much of a long-term thing. If there's going to be a Superwoman that's picked from Superman's supporting cast, I think Lana is the best fit. And in the past, I think she's been Superwoman or a type of Superwoman or whatever. And that makes a little more sense to me. Anyway, what I'm intrigued about, though, that keeps me in support of this story is by the end of this issue, we see them calling back to Doomsday's origins and like one of the significant planets that played a real significant role in his origin. I can't remember the name of the story. It was the first story about Doomsday after the death and return of Superman, where he kind of like has a rematch, and Wave Rider gets involved, and the cyborg Superman was part of the story as well. Anyway, that was the story that really revealed Doomsday's origins. And in Superman 20, by the end, they are calling back several times to that story. So it looks like we're going to get a pretty significant revisiting of elements of Doomsday's origin. And I'm like, okay, cool. If you're not going to have him show up and really do some permanent damage in the DC universe, then at least build up his legend some more. But they're walking on thin ice. They could easily screw him up as a character if they decide to retcon some stuff, build some stuff into his origin that kind of like monkeys with him too much. I don't know, we'll see, but at the very least, I'm still intrigued, if not completely happy about everything as of Superman number 20. Next up, Green Arrow 18. Not much to say about this. It is the first part of a new era, as they say on the front cover. I can't remember if it's got a new creative team. The art seems to be different, but the thing I noticed most is it's a ground level, street level Green Arrow story where he is going after wealthy, corrupt, corporate fat cats and stuff. I mean, like this kind of liberal Avenger. And I'm not politically liberal, but I mean, this is part of Green Arrow's background, and it's a callback to his inspirations from Robin Hood. And I'm like, yeah, okay, so let's lean into that and see what you want to do with that kind of concept. I think Green Arrow, I've wanted kind of a gritty, street level Green Arrow book that isn't too busy with a bunch of other characters necessarily. This book focuses on him. No sign of the Green Arrow family right now. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe long term I'll have some thoughts about that. But for now, I'm like, great. Solo, street level, creeping around in buildings at night, and not using too many trick arrows, just really good at traditional arrows. I'm interested in seeing where this take on Green Arrow goes. That is beginning here in Green Arrow 18. And then finally, we've got Black Canary, Best of the Best. This, I believe, is a mini-series. I can't remember if we know how many issues, but it's written by Tom King, and I'm intrigued by this because it's being promoted as this big match between Black Canary and Lady Shiva. And Lady Shiva is known as like the best martial artist in the DC universe, always has been. Although, as I've been catching up with Cassandra Cain's backstory and reading Batgirl issues from like the mid-2000s, I think they at least had a draw if Cassandra Cain didn't actually win a hand-to-hand fight with Lady Shiva. At the very least, it was a draw. But they present Lady Shiva here like she has never been defeated in just a straight-up, no weapons, no powers, hand-to-hand combat type thing. Black Canary has been trained some, if I remember correctly, by Lady Shiva. And so it's interesting on like a nerdy fan level of like, they've been building up Black Canary, Dinah Lance, as a premier martial artist of the DC Universe. They've been doing that for years now. She wasn't always that. She was mostly like a good martial artist, and she has this canary cry thing. But as the years have gone by, especially starting around, I think, the Birds of Prey era, they really started building her up as like, she is a premier martial artist in the DCU. And so to see her get to this point where it's like, oh, could she win? Is this even an interesting question? It's kind of cool to see Black Canary come to this point. I've never really been interested in her canary cry ability. It's a little bit like Airwave's ability. Like, I think this is kind of a nerdy, dorky power. You know, sometimes it can be used cool if the writing is creative and kind of does something clever. But the rest of the time, I'm like, not really into it. But, you know, just a cool female martial artist. They got to get rid of the fishnet stockings. I don't know. They keep bringing those back, but I'm not into them. Anyway, a cool female martial artist. I'm curious, but at the same time, I'm like, this feels like, I don't know, just like a nerd fantasy of like two action figures beating up against each other, like, you know, the nerd conversation of who would win. But does that actually make a good story? Surprisingly, it does. Because most of this book is flashing back and forth between like the ring and the beginning of the fight and the lead up to it as Dinah Lance is training and interacting with her mom, the original Black Canary, and we learn more about that mother-daughter dynamic and that her mother is also like battling cancer right now, in a really striking scene where she takes off the wig she's known to wear because she's a natural brunette. Both of these, the Black Canaries are. That's part of their disguise, is to wear a blonde wig. But when her mother takes off the wig in a private moment, she's bald, evidently going through some cancer treatment. And so it kind of goes to some really heavy, dramatic places. And then also there's a twist, which I think I kind of needed. I needed to know, why would Black Canary waste her time doing this? When she is a superhero, she should not be busying herself with like seeing if she can beat Lady Shiva. There's crime happening in the world. Why in the world would she do this? Well, we find out in this issue near the end that evidently she is taking some money or a gift of some kind that is going to, in her mind, result in her mother's cure and survivability, in order to fall in the 6th round of this bout. And like that's intriguing to me. I want to see where that goes, and I'm glad I needed something like that to justify why she would be motivated to even do this to begin with. Lady Shiva, I think she's so much into just the art, the craft of fighting. She likes testing herself, so I see why she would be on board. The one thing I'm wondering about that I think maybe could take this story in a direction I don't like, is that they are setting up Dinah Lance as an underdog that we as an audience ought to root for. I want Dinah Lance to win because I'm already invested in her in this first issue. I'm invested in her story. I care about her. She's the underdog. Lady Shiva is just, she's a bad lady. So, on that level, I want Dinah Lance to win. But Lady Shiva serves a very important role in the DC universe. She is the ultimate martial artist. And so when you want to say something about someone else's martial arts skill, at some point you need to compare them to Lady Shiva. Or have them interact with Lady Shiva. You got to see how they stack up compared to the ultimate unbeatable martial artist. And so if Black Canary wins, then she becomes the new Lady Shiva. Lady Shiva becomes kind of almost irrelevant because she doesn't have her own book. She's more of a plot device than a character that I think most readers would care about. And I like her as this legendary figure in the background that's brought into stories now and then that have to do with martial arts. I don't want her to lose that. What I think will probably happen is that Black Canary will not win the fight, but there will be left with a question or a moment that readers can interpret in different ways, where a reader could justifiably say, I think she would have won. Like the match will not go to, she'll take this bribe, she'll take this hit, and as readers will always kind of wonder, and maybe some of us will think, she could actually win, But I think, even though this is trumped up as like, this fight is what this story is about, it's the whole premise of it, I think, and kind of hope, that it will be left an unanswered question, which one of these two would beat each other. Yeah, at the very least, I don't want Black Canary to win. I want her to win in life. I don't want her to win this fight with Lady Shiva. I'm so conflicted. Anyway. Okay, looking at comics now, released to the Ultra Tier on January 1st, 2025, originally published December 4th, 2024. First up, Two-Face, #1, part of the All-In Initiative. And I found this interesting in terms of the premise. The premise basically is that Harvey, we find out at the end of the issue, believes that he is regaining control and has suppressed the bad Harvey that he's tucked away deep inside of himself. And he is planning to, in his mind, show the state that he is able to resume his role as the district attorney. And the way he's going to do that is to bring order and justice of a sort to this kind of underground court that the criminals in Gotham have started, called the White Church, I think, if I remember correctly, where they kind of try to settle a number of their own disputes, their own problems, so that it doesn't draw unnecessary attention to the criminal underworld, so that they can kind of maintain a status quo of how they operate and not draw too much heat from like the feds or whatever. And so it's interesting because it draws on his past as the district attorney, and he is serving as an attorney in this strange court, but is trying to keep up the pretense that he is still Two-Face and is still deciding things at times randomly by flipping a coin. We find out late in the issue he actually has gained enough control to mar both sides of his coin so that it will always flip to the bad side when he conveniently, would want it to flip to the bad side, as in this case to decide the guilt of someone that he actually does find guilty and is guilty, but he flips the coin to kind of trick the other criminals around him into thinking, but I'm still crazy. So I assume he also has a both sides good coin in a situation where he has determined someone to be innocent and wants to ultimately, find them innocent in the court proceedings here. It's very weird, but very interesting. Now, normally, I don't know that I would be interested in a book about a villain. There needs to be some complexity there, like there was with the Penguin, where you're trying to figure out, well, is he good? Is he bad? Well, yes, he's got some good and some bad, but when is he being good? When is he being bad? And I think they could do something just as interesting and complex with Two-Face here, because he does have a good man inside of him that is trying to fight his way to the surface, and that's something that we can root for, even though to really have permanent victory would destroy Two-Face as a comic book character, and so we know that's not going to permanently happen. But to see that struggle, I think, is something that we can all relate with, that we have bad impulses and we have good desires, and it's a matter of which one is going to win out in the moment. So I think Two-Face, there's a lot of great potential there. I'm just interested in, I guess, what the potential messaging will be going forward in his internal battle with good versus evil. Lots of potential here, but I'm just curious at this point. I don't know if this premise, this writing, this story is going to go the distance in hooking me in. It's an interesting start, though. So that's Two-Face number 1. Then Batgirl number 2, following this story arc called Mother, which has Cassandra Cain, Batgirl, kind of out on the run with her mother, Lady Shiva, which was a revelation to me, and one that, among other things, made me go on a journey in the last few weeks, just in my free time, catching up on Cassandra Cain's history as Batgirl, which the DC Universe Infinite app really makes pretty easy to kind of catch up on the key stories that feature Cassandra Cain. And I'm finding her fascinating as a Batgirl, probably... Maybe, I don't know if she's my favorite. I think that Gail Simone's Batgirl is probably my favorite Batgirl book to read. But conceptually, I might think Cassandra Cain is the Batgirl choice for me. So I'm on a Batgirl journey right now. I'm still enjoying this story that I think in some ways is a good jumping on point for the Cassandra Cain Batgirl. But I think that there's so much that inevitably people are going to want to know just jumping in at this point. And so anyway, yeah, I guess I don't have much more to say. I'll have more hopefully to say as I learn and catch up more with Cassandra Cain's history. But anyway, still enjoying this new run with Batgirl number 2. Finally, Batman 155. This is an interesting kind of story that's for the time being focusing on Jim Gordon, who's not the commissioner right now. He's been working as a private detective for a while and just feels kind of lost without that role of commissioner, that he just feels like that's the only role I'm meant to be in. Everything else, I'm just kind of surviving. But some interesting things come to the surface with Jim Gordon, namely that he has been having an affair with the current mayor's wife. And this is a bummer. You know, it's not that I want Jim Gordon to not have any flaws, but that's a pretty big life blunder. And especially given that the story Batman Year One establishes that he has a history of unfaithfulness to his wife. Now, she died years ago, so he's not being unfaithful to his wife, but he is causing a woman, or encouraging, inciting, inviting a woman to be unfaithful to her husband. Now, is this woman in a loveless marriage? Yes. But is that a justification for an affair? Well, unfortunately, I think that the answer to that would be yes for people that are making those choices. But it's not a justification for violating marriage like that. To make matters worse, this woman and her husband, the mayor, have a child. And so Jim Gordon just getting in the mix and doing something that does so much damage to so many different people. He's a character that I have admired and been like, this is a solid guy. And yes, he had that slip, that horrible slip early in life. In fact, I'm not even sure if he was sleeping with the officer. I think her name was Essen in Batman Year One. If it ever actually got that far, I don't remember. Either way, I feel like that was part of his past that he said, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to be faithful. And so I haven't been reading everything there is to read about Gordon and every Batman comic that would have him in it, since then. But in my mind, Jim Gordon has been a noble, virtuous, stand-up guy. And he's the one standing in the light while Batman is kind of walking the edge in darkness. And so for him to fall into this is really disappointing. And I'm not even sure that the writing here recognizes what a blunder this is. It's hard to interpret in the writing. You can read and tell me what you think of Batman 155. But I almost feel like the reader is meant to feel like this affair is somewhat justified because of how unhappy she is in her marriage. It's hard to tell. It's just a messy, messy situation. And of course, you feel sympathy for a woman who's in a horrible marriage situation. But at the same time, does that make this move okay between these two? No. So it was difficult to see that kind of marring of Jim Gordon, in my opinion, in Batman 155. Will that relationship be treated in the issues to come as the horrible thing that it was? Will that really be denounced? Will Jim Gordon have a moment where he said, I never should have done that? That even in a loveless marriage, I should have sought for her to get help and for their marriage to get help, rather than to insert myself into that situation and just make an even bigger mess of the whole situation. Will he have that kind of moment where the light bulb goes on and he confesses, there's no way I should have done this? I don't know. That's what I would want to happen. And that's where I could see Jim Gordon then start moving back to a character that I would admire and really respect again. Do I feel sympathy for him as a character? Yes. But he's not in a place where I'm admiring him anymore. That's a big blow to my view of Jim Gordon in Batman 155. Okay, that was a lot of comics to cover. I think for my ring selection this week, I'm going with blue for hope. 3 weeks of comics here, and there were definitely some things that I enjoyed and found engaging. There were several comics I found solid, but just not worth making any comments on. So all in all, as we head into 2025, I am feeling hopeful that there will be a number of comics this year, both included in the All In initiative and outside of the All In initiative, that I will enjoy and will remind me again why I enjoy being a DC fan. So anyway, I guess those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and comments and reactions in the comments below. So yeah, please leave them there. Also, check out christiangeekcentral.com. There's a ton of content for you there. You can also get this content in the form of a monthly podcast that brings all of the audio from these weekly installments together, so you can digest it that way if you would like. All that and more that you can get connected to at christiangeekcentral.com. Thanks. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.